When you search for stories about World War II snipers, when you watch military documentaries, when you read about incredible wartime feats of marksmanship, you encounter narratives that are absolutely fascinating. They're dramatic. They're inspiring. They're emotionally powerful. A young soldier overcomes doubt and ridicule. He creates something from nothing. He makes an impossible shot. He changes everything. These stories are everywhere. They appear on YouTube. They appear on military history websites. They appear in books. They appear on social media. They get shared millions of times. They inspire people. They make us believe in human ingenuity and perseverance under impossible circumstances. But here's a question worth asking. How many of these stories are actually true? How many of them can be verified through military records? How many of them are based on documented historical facts versus how many are compelling narratives that feel true even if the evidence doesn't quite support them? This is the story I want to tell you today. It's not about dismissing the power of these narratives. It's about understanding the difference between myth and verified history. It's about learning to ask critical questions about stories that inspire us. It's about understanding how military mythology actually forms and why we believe stories that might not be quite as documented as we think. Let me start with a specific story. A story you might have encountered online or on a documentary. A story about an American sniper named Jack Bigham, a 22-year-old mechanic from Kansas, a man who built a sniper scope from a broken medical microscope, a man who took a shot at over 1,200 yards and destroyed a German Panzer tank, a story about a man who was laughed at and then vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. It's a great story. It has all the elements that make narratives compelling. It has doubt. It has innovation. It has an impossible achievement. It has vindication. It inspires us because it suggests that if you believe in yourself, if you're willing to innovate, if you're willing to defy conventional thinking, you can accomplish extraordinary things. But here's what historical research actually shows when you dig deep into military records. There is no documented evidence that Jack Bigham existed. There are no military rosters listing a soldier by that name in the 4th Infantry Division, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Infantry Regiment. There are no after-action reports mentioning this shot. There are no veteran testimonies confirming the incident. There are no archival documents verifying any of the details. The story exists. It has been told and retold online. It has inspired people. But it appears to be fictional. And that is a crucial distinction, because it teaches us something important about how we consume information about history. It teaches us about the difference between a compelling narrative and a verified historical fact. Let me explain how I know this. Military historians have studied this question. Archivists have searched military records. The National Archives and Records Administration, the central repository for American military documentation from World War II, contains no record of Jack Bigham. The 4th Infantry Division's official history and documentation make no mention of him. No memoir has been published under his name. No veteran has come forward to corroborate the story. The Kansas Military History Center, which the story claims holds his rifle and scope, has no record of such an artifact. When something this extraordinary is supposed to have happened, when it's supposed to have occurred in a combat zone with witnesses, when it's supposed to have influenced military doctrine, the documentation should exist. Military organizations keep detailed records. Officers file after-action reports. Soldiers write memoirs. Veterans give oral histories. But for this event, despite it being shared widely online and believed by many people, there is no documentary evidence. This doesn't mean nothing like this ever happened. It means we can't verify this specific incident. It means we should be skeptical of accepting it as historical fact just because it's been told in a compelling way. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that while Jack Bigham appears to be fictional, the background details are accurate. The M19903 Springfield rifle was indeed used as a sniper weapon in World War II. The Weaver 330C scope was a genuine issue sniper scope. The 4th Infantry Division was indeed in France in February 1945. Panzer IV tanks were indeed present in that region. The technical details about rifle performance are generally accurate. So the story is woven from real details, real equipment, real units, and real locations. But the central character and the central incident appear to be fabricated. This is how myths form. You take real historical context. You add real equipment and real units. You create a compelling character and a dramatic incident. And suddenly you have something that feels true even though the core of it is invented. But there's a larger question here. If the Jack Bigum story is apparently fictional, what about other famous World War II sniper stories? What about the stories we're told about incredible shots and incredible snipers? How many of those are actually verified by historical records? This is where things get interesting. Because while Jack Bigum appears to be fictional, there are genuine documented cases of World War II snipers making extraordinary shots and having enormous impact on warfare. The difference is that these verified cases have names, units, dates, corroborating testimony, and archival documentation. Let me tell you about some of them. Rosa Shanina was a Soviet sniper. She was born in 1923. She joined the Soviet Red Army during World War II and became one of the most successful female snipers of the war. She was credited with 59 confirmed kills. She was one of over 1,000 female snipers that the Soviet Union trained and deployed during World War II. Her records are documented. Her unit is known. Her achievements are corroborated by Soviet military archives and by post-war interviews. Rosa Shanina died in combat in January 1945, shot by a German sniper. Her death is recorded. Her funeral is documented. She was awarded military honors. She left a diary that was found after her death. When we talk about Rosa Shanina, we're talking about a real historical person with verified documentation of her life and achievements. Ivan Sidorenko was another Soviet sniper. He operated on the Eastern Front. He was credited with over 500 kills, making him one of the most effective snipers of World War II. His records are documented in Soviet military archives. His accounts are corroborated by fellow soldiers. When we talk about Ivan Sidorenko, we're talking about a documented historical figure. The Soviets kept meticulous records of their snipers. They tracked kill counts. They documented unit assignments. They maintained personnel files. This is how we know so much about Soviet snipers even today, decades after the war ended. The documentation exists. The Germans also kept detailed records of their snipers. German sniper achievement was legendary throughout World War II. German snipers were feared by the Allies. They were well trained. They had superior optics. The Germans kept careful documentation of their personnel and their achievements. We can look at those records today and verify specific German snipers and their confirmed kills. American sniper documentation is somewhat less centralized than Soviet or German records, but it still exists. The U.S. Army kept records of sniper training. Military units filed after-action reports. Soldiers wrote memoirs. When you have a genuine historical incident, you can usually find some trace of it in these records. You can find a name. You can find a date. You can find corroborating testimony from other people who were there. Now, here's what's interesting about this. The documented World War II sniper achievements, while impressive, are generally different from what popular mythology suggests. The longest verified sniper shots of World War II are typically in the 600 to 1,000 yard range. This is well within the documented effective range of sniper rifles of that era using contemporary scopes. These are not mythical shots. These are documented achievements within the technical capabilities of the weapons being used. The Vitan 200-yard shot that Jack Bigum supposedly made would be approximately double the documented maximum effective range for an M19903 Springfield sniper rifle. Modern military snipers using 50 BMG rifles and advanced fire control systems achieve mile-plus shots, and those are celebrated as extraordinary achievements. A 1-200-yard shot with a World War II-era rifle scope would be technologically implausible, not merely difficult. This is important to understand because it shows us something about how myths differ from reality. Myths often exaggerate. They often exceed what's technically possible. They often embellish the details to make stories more dramatic. But historical facts, when they're carefully documented and verified, tend to stay within the bounds of what's technically feasible with the equipment of the era. So we have a case study here in how military mythology forms. We have a story that feels plausible because it uses real equipment, real units, real locations, and real historical context. We have a story that is emotionally compelling because it tells us about a man overcoming doubt and ridicule and achieving something extraordinary. We have a story that has been widely shared and widely believed. But we don't have documentary evidence that it actually happened. This doesn't mean we should dismiss all military stories as false. It means we should develop a skill at asking the right questions. When you encounter a historical story, you should ask, who is claiming this happened? What documentary evidence supports it? Are there corroborating witnesses? Does it align with what we know about the technical capabilities of the era? If you can't find documentary evidence for a claim that's supposed to have happened in a military context, if there are no names in military rosters, no after-action reports, no memoirs, no corroborating testimony, then you should be skeptical. You can still find the story interesting. You can still appreciate it as a narrative. But you should be honest about the fact that you can't verify it as historical fact. Let me talk about why this matters beyond just historical accuracy. In our modern world, we're surrounded by stories. We have access to more information than any previous generation. We can watch documentaries. We can read articles. We can see videos. We can follow social media posts. And all of these present themselves as truth. All of these claim to be telling us what actually happened, but many of these sources are mixing verified historical fact with compelling narrative and dramatization. They're doing this not necessarily to deceive, but because compelling narratives are more engaging than dry facts. A story about Jack Bigham overcoming doubt and making an impossible shot is more engaging than a discussion of documented sniper ranges and the actual technical limitations of World War II era rifles. So we get documentaries that tell stories that feel true. We get videos that claim to present verified history, but are actually presenting dramatized versions of history or completely invented narratives. We get stories that are shared millions of times online and believed by huge numbers of people despite having no documentary foundation. This is a critical literacy skill for the modern world. You need to be able to distinguish between a story that feels true and a story that is actually verified as true. You need to be able to ask questions about evidence. You need to be able to recognize when something lacks documentary support. Let me give you a framework for evaluating military historical claims. First, look for specific names and dates. If someone is claiming that a specific person did a specific thing, there should be a name, a date, and a location. General claims like a soldier did this are much harder to verify than specific claims like Jack Bigham, February 12, 1945, near Epernay, France. If you can't find those specific details, it's harder to verify. Second, look for military documentation. After major engagements, military units file after-action reports. These are official documents that describe what happened. If an incident was significant enough to be worth talking about, it usually appears in after-action reports. If you can't find it in official military documentation, that's a red flag. Third, look for corroborating testimony. If multiple people were present for an event, multiple people should be able to testify about it. If only one person ever mentions something, or if the account comes from sources far removed from the event, that's worth being skeptical about. Fourth, look for contemporary accounts. Stories told close to the time they happened are more reliable than stories told decades later with only vague recollection. Diaries, letters, immediate reports are more reliable sources than memoirs written 40 years after the fact. Fifth, check technical plausibility. Does the claim align with what we know about the technical capabilities of weapons and equipment of the era? If someone is claiming a shot that exceeds documented effective ranges by a huge margin, be skeptical. Sixth, look for the claim across multiple sources. If something really happened and was documented, you should be able to find it referenced in multiple reliable sources. If you only find it in one place or in social media posts, be skeptical. Using this framework, the Jack Bigum story fails on almost every level. There's no specific documentation. There are no military records. There's no corroborating testimony from other soldiers. The WUS 200-yard shot exceeds documented effective ranges, and the story primarily exists on internet posts and videos, not in established historical sources. This doesn't mean the story is worthless. It means we should be honest about what it is. It's a compelling narrative that may or may not have been inspired by real events. It's a story that illustrates principles about innovation and perseverance, but it's not verified historical fact. Now, why does this matter? Why should you care whether Jack Bigum was a real historical figure or a fictional character? Because how you think about history affects how you think about the world. If you accept unverified stories as truth, you build your understanding of history on a shaky foundation. If you can't distinguish between verified fact and compelling narrative, you become susceptible to misinformation. In our modern world, this skill is increasingly important, not just for understanding military history, but for understanding current events, political claims, scientific claims, and every other area where information is presented to you. When someone makes a claim, when you encounter a story online, when you watch a video that presents something as fact, you should ask, is this documented? Is this verified? Or is this a compelling narrative that feels true even though the documentary foundation might be missing? This is what media literacy means. It means being a critical consumer of information. It means asking questions. It means not accepting everything you see just because it's presented in a compelling way. The World War II sniper stories that we can verify are genuinely impressive. Soviet snipers really did achieve extraordinary things. German snipers really were exceptionally skilled. American soldiers really did develop innovative tactics and equipment under combat conditions. These verified stories are compelling enough without needing to embellish them with fictional narratives. So, what's the lesson here? The lesson is that real history, when you actually look at the documentary evidence, is often as compelling as the myths we construct around it. And when we learn to verify our sources, when we learn to ask critical questions, when we learn to distinguish between myth and reality, we actually get better stories. We get stories that are grounded in truth. We get stories about real people doing real things under real circumstances. The Jack Bigum story is an interesting case study because it shows us how myths form in the modern world. It shows us how a compelling narrative, combined with real historical details, can create something that feels true even if the central character and central incident are not documented. It shows us why we need to be critical consumers of information. And it shows us why the skill of media literacy is increasingly important in a world where anyone can create and share content that presents itself as truth. So, the next time you encounter a military history story online, ask yourself, is this documented? Can I find this in multiple reliable sources? Does this have contemporary documentation from the time it happened? Or is this a compelling narrative that feels true even if the foundation is shaky? When you ask these questions, you become a more critical thinker. You become better at distinguishing truth from fiction. You become better at understanding history accurately. And you become better at navigating the information landscape of the modern world, where compelling narratives are often more prevalent than verified facts. The verified stories of World War II snipers are genuinely remarkable. Real people achieving real things under real combat conditions. Those are the stories worth learning, not because they're more dramatic, but because they're true. And truth, when you actually examine it carefully, is compelling enough on its own. Let me go deeper into some specific verified cases, so you understand what documented military history actually looks like, compared to the Jack Bigum story. take Lyudmila Pavlichenko, one of the most famous Soviet female snipers of World War II. She was credited with 309 confirmed kills, making her one of the most successful snipers of the entire war, not just female snipers. But what makes her case different from the Jack Bigum story is the extensive documentation. We have her military records. We have contemporary photographs of her in uniform with her rifle. We have accounts from fellow soldiers who served with her. We have her post-war interviews where she discussed her experiences. We have records of awards she received. We have documentation of where she served, which units she was attached to, what weapons she used. More importantly, we have corroborating testimony from multiple sources. Other Soviet soldiers wrote about her. Western military intelligence tracked her record. After the war, historians interviewed people who knew her. This is how we know her story is real. Not because it's emotionally compelling, but because multiple independent sources confirm the basic facts. Vasily Zaitsev was a famous Soviet sniper, credited with over 242 confirmed kills. His exploits became somewhat legendary during the war, particularly the story of his duel with a German sniper named Erwin König. This story has been mythologized in books and movies. But here's what's important. The basic facts are documented. Zaitsev was a real person. He was a real sniper. He did achieve a very high kill count. The unit he served with is documented. His records are available in Soviet military archives. The duel with König, however, is less clearly documented. Different sources give different accounts. Some question whether it happened exactly as it's been portrayed. But even with the uncertainty around that specific incident, the core fact remains. Zaitsev was a real, documented historical figure with a verified record of achievement. This is the key difference. With Jack Bigum, we have no documentary foundation at all. With Zaitsev, we have documentary evidence of a real person, even if some of the details of specific incidents are less clear. German snipers of World War II are extensively documented. The Germans kept detailed records. We know the names of German snipers. We know their kill counts. We know the units they served with. We can look at German military archives and verify specific individuals and their achievements. This is why historians know so much about German sniper tactics, training, and equipment. The documentation exists. American snipers are similarly documented, though American sniper records are sometimes less centralized than German or Soviet records. But we can still verify specific American snipers and their achievements. We have names. We have units. We have after-action reports. We have memoirs. We have corroborating testimony. The point is that when something really happened in World War II, when something occurred in a combat zone with multiple witnesses and military organizations involved, the documentary record usually reflects it. You can find names. You can find dates. You can find units. You can find corroborating testimony. With the Jack Bigum story, you find none of that. You find an interesting narrative that uses real historical details. But you don't find the fundamental documentation that should exist if the story were true. Let me talk about how this relates to the modern information landscape. We live in a world where information spreads incredibly quickly. A video can be watched by millions of people within days. A story can be shared across social media platforms and reach enormous audiences. And much of this happens without any quality control, without anyone fact-checking, without anyone verifying whether what's being presented is actually true. This creates an environment where compelling narratives can spread widely even if they lack documentary foundation. The Jack Bigum story is a perfect example. It's been shared on YouTube. It's been posted on social media. It's been viewed by hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions. Many of those people believe it's true. Many of them have shared it with others. Many of them have used it as an inspiration story. But if even a small percentage of those people had done basic fact-checking, had searched for Jack Bigum in military records, had looked for after-action reports documenting this incident, they would have found that the documentary evidence doesn't exist. Instead, the story spread because it's compelling and because most people don't do that level of verification. This is a problem that extends far beyond military history. It affects how we understand current events. It affects how we understand political claims. It affects how we understand scientific claims. If we're not skilled at distinguishing between compelling narratives and verified facts, we become vulnerable to misinformation across all areas of knowledge. Let me give you some specific techniques for fact-checking military history claims. First, use Google Scholar or academic databases. If something really happened and was documented, academic historians should have written about it. You can search academic databases for references to people and events. If something doesn't appear in academic literature at all, that's a red flag. Second, check military archives. The National Archives maintains records from World War II. The Library of Congress has extensive collections. Unit histories are often digitized and available online. If you're looking for information about a specific person or unit, check these sources. If the person or incident doesn't appear in military documentation, that's significant. Third, look for contemporary accounts. Letters and diaries written during the war are more reliable than memories written decades later. If something important happened, there should be documentation from the time it happened. If you can only find accounts written long after the war, be more skeptical. Fourth, check for primary source citations. If someone is making a claim about history, they should be able to point to the source. They should be able to say, "This is documented in this military record," or "This is from this person's memoir." If they can't point to a specific source, that's a problem. Fifth, be suspicious of stories that have all the right emotional beats but lack specific details. The Jack Bigham story has a perfect narrative arc: ridicule, secret work, doubt, triumph, vindication. It has all the elements of a compelling story, but it lacks the specific details that would confirm it as true. It lacks specific names of people who laughed at him. It lacks specific names of officers who initially dismissed him. These are the kinds of details that appear in real historical accounts. Sixth, check multiple sources. If something really happened, you should be able to find it referenced in multiple reliable sources. If you can only find it in one place, or if it appears primarily on social media and non-academic websites, that's a red flag. Seventh, be aware of the difference between a well-known story and a verified story. Something can be famous online and still not be verified. The Jack Bigham story is well known. It's been shared widely. But that doesn't make it true. Many false stories are well known. Eighth, understand the difference between something that's plausible and something that's documented. The Jack Bigham story is plausible. It uses real equipment. It uses real units. It uses real locations. It describes tactics that were used. But being plausible is not the same as being documented. Many plausible things never happened. These fact-checking techniques apply to history, but they also apply to current events and other areas of knowledge. The fundamental principle is the same. Don't accept claims just because they're compelling. Demand evidence. Demand documentation. Demand corroboration. Now, I want to talk about why we're attracted to stories like Jack Bigham's even when they're not documented. These stories appeal to us because they embody values we care about. They show someone overcoming doubt. They show someone thinking creatively. They show someone achieving something extraordinary through determination and ingenuity. They show someone refusing to accept limitations. These are powerful themes. We're drawn to them. We want to believe them, and there's nothing wrong with being drawn to these themes. The problem is when we let that attraction override our critical judgment. The problem is when we accept stories as historical fact just because we like what they represent. This is where the angled deck story, which you learned about earlier, becomes relevant. The mythology of the angled deck appeals to us because it shows individual genius overcoming institutional resistance. That's a powerful narrative. But the reality is more complex. The reality involves institutional collaboration and systematic improvement. The reality is less dramatically satisfying, but it's more truthful. The same principle applies to the Jack Biggham story. The story appeals to us because it shows perseverance overcoming ridicule. But we should be honest about the fact that we can't verify it happened. We should be honest about what we can verify and what we can't. Here's something important. Being honest about what we can and can't verify doesn't make history less interesting. It makes it more interesting, because the actual documented stories of World War II snipers are genuinely remarkable. Real people achieving real things. Soviet snipers, German snipers, American soldiers. All of them accomplished extraordinary feats. All of them have documented records of achievement. These verified stories are compelling enough without embellishment. They show us what humans are capable of under extreme conditions. They show us ingenuity. They show us skill. They show us perseverance. Everything that the Jack Biggham story claims to show us, the verified stories actually demonstrate with documented evidence. So the choice isn't between believing inspiring stories and accepting a boring, factual version of history. The choice is between believing unverified stories that feel inspiring and learning verified stories that are actually inspiring because they're true. Let me talk about what happens when myths become so widespread that they influence how institutions operate. With the Jack Biggham story, it hasn't yet reached the point where it's influencing military doctrine. It's primarily circulating online. But if enough people believed it, if enough military analysts took it as historical fact, it could influence how military organizations think about sniper training or equipment development. This is why distinguishing between myth and reality matters. When institutional decisions are based on unverified narratives rather than documented facts, those decisions are less likely to be effective. With the angled deck story, the mythology did influence how people thought about innovation. For decades, the story was told as a narrative of individual genius overcoming institutional resistance. This fed into a cultural narrative that institutions are obstacles to innovation rather than facilitators of it. But the reality, as we discussed, is that institutions facilitated the innovation. Institutional collaboration made the angled deck possible. If military leaders had believed only the mythology, they might have made different decisions about how to organize for innovation. They might have focused too much on finding individual geniuses and not enough on creating organizational structures that facilitate innovation. The reality, properly understood, provides better guidance. This is the practical importance of distinguishing myth from reality. It's not just about being historically accurate, though that matters. It's about making better decisions based on better understanding of how things actually work. So, as we wrap up, let me return to the fundamental question. Why does this matter? It matters because we live in an era of unprecedented information access. We can learn about anything. We can watch documentaries. We can read articles. We can see videos. And all of this information is competing for our attention. In this environment, the skill of critical evaluation is increasingly important. We need to be able to ask questions. We need to be able to distinguish between compelling narratives and verified facts. We need to be able to recognize when something lacks documentary foundation. The Jack Biggham story is a useful teaching tool precisely because it's not documented. It shows us what unverified history looks like. It shows us how a compelling narrative can circulate widely without documentary support. It shows us why we need to be skeptical consumers of information, and the alternative, the verified stories of World War II snipers, shows us what documented history looks like. It shows us the kinds of details and corroboration that indicate something is actually verified. It shows us what we should look for when we're trying to determine whether something is true. By learning to distinguish between these, by learning to ask the right questions, by learning to demand evidence and documentation, you become a more critical thinker. You become better at navigating the information landscape. You become better at understanding history accurately, and that's a skill that serves you well not just in understanding military history, but in understanding the world more broadly. Because the same techniques you use to verify military history claims can be applied to verify claims in science, politics, economics, and any other field where information is presented to you. The Jack Bigum story is interesting as a cultural artifact. It's interesting as an example of how mythology forms in the modern world. But the real lesson is this: demand evidence. Ask questions. Don't accept claims just because they're compelling. Verify your sources. That's how you separate myth from reality. And in a world full of both, that skill is increasingly valuable. Let me talk about something deeper: the psychology of why we believe unverified stories. There's a psychological principle called confirmation bias. When we encounter information that aligns with what we already believe or want to believe, we tend to accept it uncritically. When we encounter information that contradicts what we believe, we tend to scrutinize it carefully. The Jack Bigum story aligns with beliefs many of us hold. We believe that individuals can make a difference. We believe that innovation comes from creative thinking. We believe that perseverance can overcome obstacles. The story confirms these beliefs, so we're inclined to accept it without rigorous verification. If someone presented a story that contradicted our values, if someone said that individual innovation never works or that perseverance is futile, we would immediately be skeptical. We would demand evidence. We would question the claim. But when a story aligns with our values, we let our guard down. We accept it more readily. We share it without verifying it. This is a natural human tendency. It's not a character flaw, but it's something we need to be aware of when we consume information. Another psychological factor is emotional resonance. Stories that make us feel something, that inspire us or move us emotionally, are more likely to be remembered and shared. The Jack Bigum story makes many people feel something. It inspires them. It moves them. So they remember it. They share it. They recommend it to others. A dry fact presented without emotional resonance is less likely to stick in our memory. A verified historical fact about actual sniper ranges and actual documented achievements might be accurate, but it might not feel as emotionally compelling as the Jack Bigum story. So the unverified story spreads while the verified facts remain relatively unknown. This is why narrative and emotion matter so much in how information spreads. It's not necessarily that people are stupid or gullible. It's that we're wired to be attracted to emotionally compelling stories and to be less attracted to dry facts. Understanding this about ourselves can help us resist it. When we encounter a story that really moves us, when we find ourselves wanting to believe it immediately, that's a signal to pause and ask critical questions. That's the moment to demand verification rather than accepting the story at face value. Let me talk about how to actually conduct historical research to verify claims. If someone makes a claim about World War II, the first step is to identify exactly what's being claimed. Is it a claim about a specific person, a specific event, a specific date, a specific location? The more specific the claim, the more verifiable it should be. Then you identify what type of sources could verify this claim. For military history, the relevant sources would be military records, unit histories, official reports, memoirs by people who were there, veteran interviews, and academic historians who have researched the topic. Then you search for these sources. For American military records from World War II, the National Archives is the primary source. You can search for unit records. You can look for personnel files. You can find after-action reports. For a specific unit like the 4th Infantry Division, you can find the official division history. You can find records of specific operations. If the person you're researching actually existed and actually served in a specific unit, you should be able to find them in the personnel records of that unit. If the event you're researching actually happened, it should appear in the official after-action reports of the unit involved. If you search systematically and can't find any trace of something that's supposed to be a well-documented historical fact, that's a significant finding. It doesn't prove the event didn't happen, but it suggests that the documentary evidence doesn't exist. This is what researchers found when they looked for Jack Bigum. They searched military records. They searched unit histories. They searched after-action reports. They searched personnel files. They found nothing, no trace, no mention. Compare this to searching for information about a real World War II sniper. If you search for information about Lyudmila Pavlichenko, you find extensive documentation. You find contemporary records from the Soviet military. You find photographs. You find post-war interviews. You find multiple academic sources that have researched her life and achievements. The documentation is abundant. This difference is important. When something really happened and was documented, the documentary evidence typically exists and is discoverable. When something didn't happen, or when it's fictional, the documentary evidence doesn't exist. Let me talk about a modern parallel to help illustrate why this matters. In recent years, we've seen the rise of what's called fake news. Stories that are false or misleading but presented in a way that mimics real news. These stories often go viral on social media. They're shared widely. Many people believe them, but they lack documentary foundation. The same techniques you use to verify historical facts are the techniques you can use to verify current news claims. Who is claiming this? What's the source? Can you find this reported in multiple reputable news organizations? Can you find primary sources that support the claim? If a story only appears on certain websites or social media accounts and doesn't appear in major news organizations, that's worth being skeptical about. If a story makes a sensational claim but you can't find any official sources confirming it, that's worth questioning. The ability to verify claims is relevant not just to history, but to understanding current events and protecting yourself from misinformation. Let me talk about the consequences of believing unverified stories, particularly in military contexts. If military organizations base decisions on unverified historical narratives, those decisions might be suboptimal. For example, if military leaders believe the Jack Bigum story and conclude that individual innovation is more important than organizational systems, they might restructure how military organizations operate in ways that are ineffective. More broadly, if a significant portion of the population believes unverified military stories, this can affect military recruitment, public support for military operations, and military policy. If people believe myths about military capability or military history that aren't true, they might support policies that aren't actually in the national interest because they're based on false understandings of military realities. This is particularly important in democratic societies, where public opinion influences military policy. If the public's understanding of military history is based on myths rather than verified facts, the decisions that result from that public opinion might be poor ones. This is another reason why distinguishing myth from reality matters. It's not just academic. It has practical implications for policy and decision-making. Let me talk about some specific techniques for spotting when a historical narrative might be fictional. First, look for perfect narrative structure. Real history is messy. It has loose ends. It has unclear details. It has contradictions from different sources. When a story has a perfect narrative arc, when everything fits together perfectly, when every detail serves the story perfectly, be suspicious. Real historical events rarely have that kind of perfect structure. The Jack Bigum story has very good narrative structure. It has setup, where he's introduced and shown to be a talented mechanic. It has development, where he faces obstacles and builds his scope despite ridicule. It has climax, where he makes the impossible shot. It has resolution and vindication, where he's proven right. It's a well-constructed narrative. But that well-constructed nature is actually a reason to be more skeptical, not less, because real history is usually messier than this. Second, look for stock characters. Real history has complex, contradictory people. They have motivations that aren't always clear. They make decisions that don't always make sense. When a story has stock characters like the ridiculed innovator, or the supportive friend, or the Skeptical authority figure. These might be fictional constructs rather than real. People. The Jack Bigham story features these stock characters. Everyone dismisses him. Everyone laughs at him. Then everyone is vindicated in their belief in him. These are characters types from fiction, not the complex reality of how people actually behave. Third, look for convenient details that serve the story. In the Jack Bigham story, Jack happens to salvage a microscope right when he needs it. He happens to find a steel ring from a German artillery shell right when he needs it. He happens to identify a target that's exactly the right distance to test his scope at. These convenient details are common in fiction but less common in real history. Real life is usually less convenient. Fourth, be suspicious of stories where one person's action has enormous consequences. Real history usually involves multiple factors and multiple people contributing to outcomes. When a story suggests that one person's action changed everything, be skeptical. More likely, that person was one of many factors in a more complex outcome. Fifth, look for dramatic dialogue and internal monologue in historical narratives. If a historical account includes detailed dialogue from decades ago or describes what someone was thinking or feeling at a specific moment, be skeptical. People don't remember exact dialogue from long ago. Historians don't know what people were thinking. If the narrative includes these details, it's either reconstructed dialogue or it's fictional. The Jack Bigham narrative includes reconstructed dialogue and descriptions of what Jack was thinking and feeling. This is common in historical fiction but less rigorous as historical documentation. Using these techniques doesn't mean a story is definitely false, but it should make you more skeptical. It should make you ask for more verification before accepting it as historical fact. Let me talk about how the internet and social media have amplified the problem of unverified historical narratives. Before the internet, the spread of historical information was somewhat limited by gatekeepers. Publishers decided which books to publish. Television networks decided which documentaries to air. Historians with academic credentials wrote the historical accounts that were most widely available. This system wasn't perfect. There were biases and limitations, but it did provide some quality control. Publishers and networks had reputational incentives to present accurate information. Historians had professional incentives to verify their claims. The internet changed this. Now anyone can create content and share it with a global audience. Anyone can make a video and upload it to YouTube. Anyone can write a blog post and share it on social media. Anyone can create a documentary-style video and present it as authoritative. This democratization of publishing has tremendous benefits. It allows people without institutional backing to share information. It allows diverse perspectives to be heard. It allows information to spread quickly, but it also means that unverified narratives can spread just as quickly as verified ones. A compelling story by a talented storyteller can reach millions of people even if the story has no documentary foundation. The lack of gatekeepers means the lack of quality control. The Jack Bigham story is an example of this. It's a well-made video with good production values. It's presented in a documentary style that feels authoritative. It has compelling narration. It has emotional resonance. And because of these qualities, it spreads. It reaches millions. People believe it. They share it. They recommend it. But if the same story had been published as a magazine article submitted to an academic journal of military history, it would have been rejected immediately. The journal would have requested evidence. The journal would have noted the lack of archival support. The journal would have rejected it as unverifiable. The difference in format and distribution channel changes, whether the narrative is accepted as truth. This highlights the importance of media literacy in the modern world. You need to be able to evaluate information regardless of what format it comes in. You need to be able to recognize when something is presented persuasively but lacks verification. You need to be able to apply critical thinking to content regardless of whether it comes from traditional sources or from internet. Creators, let me provide a comprehensive framework for evaluating historical claims that you can use going forward. Step 1. Identify the specific claim. What exactly is being asserted? Is it about a specific person, a specific event, a specific date? Write down the specific claim in clear terms. Step 2. Identify what type of sources could verify this claim. For military history, military records are the primary sources. For biographical information, personnel records are primary sources. For specific events, after-action reports and unit histories are primary sources. Step 3. Search for primary source documentation. Use military archives. Use the National Archives. Use digitized historical collections. Look for official records from the time the event supposedly happened. Step 4. Search for secondary source scholarship. Look for academic books and articles about the topic. Academic historians who've researched the subject will cite primary sources and provide analysis. Step 5. Look for corroborating testimony. If multiple independent sources confirm the basic facts, that's stronger than a single source. If people who were there tell consistent stories, that strengthens the claim. Step 6. Identify gaps and inconsistencies. If different sources give different accounts of events, that's worth noting. If key details are missing or unclear, that's worth noting. Step 7. Evaluate plausibility in context. Does the claim fit with what you know about the technology, tactics, and capabilities of the era? Does it seem plausible given the historical context? Step 8. Make a determination. Based on your research, can you verify the claim? Is it well documented and corroborated? Or is it unverified despite being widely shared? Is it plausible but lacking documentation? Be honest about what you found. Using this framework will help you separate verified history from unverified narratives. It will help you understand what we actually know about history versus what we assume or believe without evidence. This is the skill of historical thinking. It's different from just knowing historical facts. It's about understanding how we know what we know. It's about understanding the difference between verified and unverified claims. It's about understanding how myths form and how they spread. This skill becomes increasingly important as we navigate a world where information spreads faster than ever, where compelling narratives can reach billions of people, where unverified stories can become cultural touchstones, where our beliefs about history, current events, and the world can be shaped by information that lacks documentary foundation. So the next time you encounter a historical story, especially one that's widely shared online, that's emotionally compelling, that aligns with your values, ask yourself, is this verified? What's the evidence? Can I find this documented in multiple reliable sources? Or is this a compelling narrative that feels true even if the documentary foundation is absent? When you ask these questions consistently, you become better at understanding the world accurately. You become better at making decisions based on truth rather than myth. You become better at navigating the complex information landscape of the modern world, and that, ultimately, is what this is about. Not just understanding military history accurately, but developing the critical thinking skills you need to understand everything accurately. The skills you need to separate truth from compelling fiction. The skills you need to live in an information-rich world without being misled by unverified narratives. That's the real value of learning to distinguish myth from reality.